in every country, profiteering happens, a collusion between the wealthiest in such society and government. The already well-to-do families make a kind of devil's pact with whatever powers there are to increase their wealth, protect their bottom lines, and maintain or increase power.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Equals. This is Max.
Hi, and this is Annie.
Annie, this is our first Equals podcast together.
It is exciting.
Really exciting. And today's guest was completely your idea, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm really glad we got to talk to David de Jong. He's a journalist, and he spent 4 years researching from Berlin to write his book. It's called Nazi Billionaires.
Yes, quite a story, isn't it? It's the link between the richest Germans today and the Nazi past.
Yeah, and how some of these rich families profited from forced labor, expropriation, war.
Yeah, I mean, pretty dark story all around and a really fascinating interview, I thought.
Yeah, really great interview.
Yeah, so let's listen to it.
David, it's really such a pleasure to have you on today. You know, I actually first came across your book at an airport, and it was the title that immediately grabbed my attention, Nazi Billionaires. Your book uncovers the hidden history of some of Germany's wealthiest families, including those behind global brands most of us know like BMW and Volkswagen. And you explain how they built or how they grew their fortune through ties to the Nazi regime. It's really a fascinating, but of course unsettling story. So to get us started today, could you let us know, how did you choose which families to focus on? And can you share some of the most striking examples?
Yeah, absolutely. But first of all, thank you for having me. With regards to the family and the companies I write about, I really decided to focus on what are still today Germany's wealthiest families. So kind of the three contemporary criteria for these families were that they still had to be relevant in global business today, or that they had sold their companies and that they invest billions worldwide through their family offices, in art, in private equity, in real estate. Another criteria was that the dynasties had to have to continue on living. They have to continue to exist. There needs to be a certain continuation so that there's also the chance for a reckoning with the past instead of the cover-up that they engage in today. And thirdly, I focus on German business dynasties with a small shareholder pool so that they have like effective economic influence or control over the companies that they own. So like the BMW heirs, which are two heirs, Stefan Quandt and Susanne Klatten, who have individual fortunes of 30 billion euros. They receive €1 billion dividend, give or take, on an annual basis from BMW. And they have, they control 47% of the BMW group. So they have effective economic control over that conglomerate, as opposed to companies like Siemens or Henkel or others, where you have 200, 300, 400, 500, 600 family shareholders, and there's not really, the control is quite diffuse. They don't really have a say in the running of the company. So those are the three contemporary criteria. Now, the three historical criteria is that they profited greatly from the Third Reich through mass weapons production, firstly. Secondly, through the process of expropriation and Aryanization, as this kind of perversely cynic term was dubbed, which was the removal of Jewish ownership from an asset, whether there was a company or art or jewelry or real estate, you name it, either through coercion by competitors or by the Nazi authorities. And thirdly, it was profiting through the mass exploitation of men, women, and children as forced and slave labor in German factories and mines during the Second World War. So an estimated between 12 and 20 million Europeans were deported to Germany and forced into slavery. An estimated 2 million also died as part of that forced and slave labor system. So taking all these criteria together, I came to 5 families that I focus on in the book. Number 1 is the Quandt dynasty, which today controls the BMW group. And secondly, it is the Flick dynasty, which are the former controlling shareholders of Daimler-Benz. Thirdly, it's the von Fink dynasty, whose patriarchs co-founded the global insurers Allianz and Munich Re. And they also own a private bank called Merckfink. Fourthly, it's the Oetker dynasty, globally known for the Dr. Oetker brand, which is mainly known from frozen pizzas. And fifthly, it's the Porsche-Piech dynasty, mainly known today for Porsche and Volkswagen, but they also control other car brands like Audi, Lamborghini, Seat, Skoda, and others.
All of them made money from forced labor, from these terrible crimes.
They did, yeah, they did. From slave labor or Aryanization, expropriation, or weapons production, yeah. And the point of me writing the book was really that they kind of engage in this contemporary cover-up by either ignoring a reckoning altogether with that history, or pretending that they've reckoned with this history, but still championing their fathers and grandfathers for their business successes through global charitable foundations, media prizes, academic chairs, corporate headquarters, museums named after these men, but leaving out any trace of their Nazi affiliations and mass war crimes after they had the burden to have reckoned with these crimes. And that's really the intent of me writing the book, is to shine a light on this kind of contemporary whitewashing of that history and championing of Nazi war criminals by some of the world's biggest companies and wealthiest families.
It's interesting you said cover up. I was just going to ask you, why do you think these stories are about these families are not better known in Germany or elsewhere? I was thinking the average person who buys, I don't know, a Volkswagen car probably doesn't know the story behind it.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And I've given a lot of thought to that. I mean, if we start with Germany for a second, right? The German society is still inundated on a daily basis with kind of revelations with regarding the Third Reich, the war crimes, the genocide, you name it. And they have become slightly desensitized. What happens when, a story breaks and its beloved patriarch Z or beloved brand company X is revealed to have, engaged in massive war crimes or have profited from massive war crimes. What immediately happens is public statement saying we're going to open our archives, we're commissioning independent historian to research our history, and we'll get it all above board. And that's kind of a way to pacify it, because then you don't hear anything from it for 4 years. And what then happens is that there's a very dense academic study is published, 1,200 pages, which looks great on the bookshelf, but those details never really reach a broad audience in Germany, let alone globally. So then they can pretend that they've reckoned with it and that nothing has happened. But on a consumer level, on a global level, and the average consumer will never really know unless there's some kind of public pressure or otherwise, or some scrutiny, from pesky journalists like myself. We're saying, what you're engaging in is hiding these facts into plain sight.
And when we look back at what they were doing at the time, I mean, do you think they themselves were Nazis? Were they opportunists, or were they both? You don't. It's not necessarily either or, is it? You can be both. But what would be your assessment of their motivations?
So the largest profiteers generally were sheer opportunists, right? I mean, they became members of the Nazi Party because it worked in their favor. They cozied up to top Nazi officials like Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda, or Hermann Göring, Hitler's right-hand man, or even Hitler himself donated to him, but only once they got into power, right? Because these families, by and large, thrived in any political system, right? Again, with the exception of the Porsche-Piech family, who laid the base of their foundation of their wealth during during the Third Reich. All the other families were already very wealthy during the German Empire, during the Weimar Republic, in the Third Reich, in occupied Western Germany, in reunified Western Germany, and in reunified Germany today. There's been a continuation of money and power, kind of unabridged for more than a century, or even longer in many cases.
Which is amazing itself when you think of the chaos that Germany has been through, that continuity of wealth at the top is...
That is true. That is true. Because a lot of them, they went under the radar. They were very good at not drawing attention to themselves.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, David, do you think that this close connection that you've described between these super rich families and the Nazi Party was a unique historical event that took place in Germany? Or do you think that it could, or that it is, an example of a broader connection between extreme wealth and extreme politics that can happen in Germany or elsewhere in the rest of the world today, in the future?
No, I mean, I focused on Germany, right? But this is a tale as old as time. I mean, it doesn't even have to be a dictatorship. Also in democracies, it is often the wealthiest individuals which find ways to either protect their wealth, from income tax or you name it, or profit off of upheaval and disaster. Whether you look at the military regime in Brazil, for example, or Putin's Russia. It's often that the already well-to-do families or influential families in a society make a kind of devil's pact with whatever powers there are to increase their wealth, protect their bottom lines, protect their fortunes, and maintain or increase power in every country. Or in every level of society, profiteering happens. A collusion between the wealthiest in such society and government happens.
I think I also found it interesting, the idea that, large-scale capitalists who presumably would be more kind of pro the free market and pro capitalism are quite happy to make common cause with governments that are like the Nazi government. They weren't all about business, were they? They weren't all about a kind of globalization, all the things we associate with, big capital today, but they still found a way to make a lot of money out of that circumstance. Do you see a bit of that today as well? Because we are starting to see kind of politics really split and a lot more extremes. And, are there still plenty of opportunities to make money, do you think?
Yeah, totally. Look at the current the current oligarchs, as they call them. Look at the the kind of the monopolistic profiteering by media companies. There's profiteering examples in kind of the lack of attention society and in eroding democracy at the same time, right? As we see. So yeah. And spreading misinformation and disinformation. I would say this seems to be a very, unfortunately, fruitful time for those that want to profit of the calamity or the demise of liberal democracy.
So, if you had to say what the lessons are of what you document for today in our world of huge billionaire wealth, of oligarchies and corporate power, what do you think is the main lesson?
Yeah, I think the main lesson is that capitalism is amoral, right? The money doesn't matter where it flows to. Most of these men started off, as I mentioned earlier, as opportunists, or they didn't start off as criminals. They looked for ways to profit, right? But you see this kind of grayscale, this kind of sliding scale of morality, where it starts off with weapon production, then it's the wholesale firing of certain board members because of their religious beliefs or backgrounds. Then it's the next step is their wholesale expropriation, which initially had this kind of veneer of legality, and then devolved into outright robbery and theft as persecution ramped up over the second half of the 1930s. And then with an absolute low point was the mass exploitation of men, women, and children, tens of millions of them in as forced and slave laborers. So it is really kind of this sliding scale of morality in order to profit. That is what one should be aware of.
Thanks, David. And in writing the book, doing all the research for the book, Would there be anything else that you think society should do to stop this happening again and history repeating itself?
Yeah, I mean, sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? Like, I think it's really important, is a scrutiny that is brought to extreme wealth, but also to very much don't make it just a meta story alone, but really hone in on the individuals that hold such incredible power. I recently published a story about Germany's wealthiest man, Klaus Michael Kühne, who is actively trying to cover up his family's really horrific family story of profiteering from the Holocaust. He controls a company called Kühne Nagel, which is one of the world's largest transportation firms, and they transported the robbed goods of Jewish families that had been deported from their homes, from the Netherlands, from France, from Belgium, from Luxembourg to Germany, where they were either auctioned off or given to families that had been bombed by the Allies. And he is he's 87. He has an estimated net worth of 50 to 60 billion. He's not only the controlling shareholder of Kühne Nagel, but also of the Lufthansa Group, of Hapag-Lloyd, one of the largest shipping companies in the world. He's also financier of HSV, which is a big football club in Hamburg. And he just announced last week that he's giving 330 million euros to Hamburg to build a new opera, right? So they're trying to kind of whitewash also through giving enormous amounts of money. And it is really, again, it's through public scrutiny on these individuals and what they're doing behind the scenes to kind of influence influence society or culture or business, and to bring that to light is really, I would say, whether through journalism or through such great publications like what Oxfam does every year with their inequality report, is these things. So I would say, this is really important.
Yeah, this year in our report, we were talking, one of the things we discussed was that billionaire wealth is largely unearned. So 60% of it now comes from inheritance, monopoly power, crony connections. 36% actually is now inherited, 36% of billionaire wealth. And I wanted to ask you, in the case of these families, what role did the intergenerational transfer of wealth play in helping them or preserve their wealth, despite it being associated with such a dark chapter of history?
No, I mean, it's extremely important, right? Because the whole reason why these heirs kind of cover up that history today or hide it in plain sight or try to whitewash it is because they stand in the shadows of their fathers and grandfathers. I mean, they're literally, their entire identity is as heir. So to speak out publicly and speak out against their fathers and grandfathers, what does that mean for their own identity, which they've completely built in their shadows, right? As heirs, as managing these fortunes. So, they have to consider kind of the standing, the share price, the sales of these major global companies like BMW and Volkswagen and Porsche.
I mean, given all that you've discussed and all you've seen in history and what you can see today, I mean, is there anything that makes you feel hopeful that we can confront this regular concentration of power and wealth and the link between that and politics? I mean, how do you see the future?
Yeah, I started as a reporter in 2011 in New York at Bloomberg. I was hired kind of in the months, of Occupy Wall Street, right? I just graduated. And, and I thought this was really a turning point, right? Either this is going to go, either kind of the issues that Occupy Wall Street is bringing to the fore are going to enact major change, or this is also going to kind of dwindle and, things are only just going to get worse and worse. I would say both happened because the consciousness regarding wealth inequality has grown so much. But wealth inequality itself has also grown so much the past 14 years. So I look really at my career now, 13 and a half years later or 14 years later, as kind of being in lockstep with these developments, with this exacerbation of wealth inequality. And I think, and I fear, unless, some measures are taken, whether on a fiscal level, on an economic level, wealth inequality is going to grow. And with that, also the discrepancies between the haves and the have-nots is that you have a kind of, almost a kind of a two-tiered, society. Those that have extreme wealth and those that have it. And that's really scary. And you also see that unless something very drastic is done, again, on a fiscal policy, economic policy level. And I don't see that. I don't see that happening.
Thank you so much, David. That was a really fascinating interview.
Thank you.
Wow, that was really fascinating. What an interview. So, Annie, did the interview live up to your expectations?
Oh, it definitely did. I mean, the book was brilliant, but it was fantastic to be able to talk to David in person. And, something that stuck with me that I've been thinking about was how he mentions capitalism is amoral. And, I think I do agree with him. But on the other hand, I don't think we can expect big corporations or the super rich individuals to police themselves. I mean, the government has to be present and has to play a role in regulating, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think somewhat, in some ways, asking a capitalist to be moral is a bit like asking a T-Rex to be a vegetarian. It's kind of they're meant to be that way. But on the other hand, I do think in some situations, particularly where the state itself is almost even worse, as you had with the Nazi regime, then surely there is some moral obligation on those individual capitalists. They can't just say, oh, I'm very ethical at home, but in my factory, I'm happy to use slave labor because that's allowed now, and I'm just a capitalist. So, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I think. Is it enabling capitalists to kind of absolve themselves from any responsibility?
That's a good question. And we'd really love to hear your thoughts. Do you think capitalism can be moral? Is that an oxymoron? I mean, and if capitalism can't be moral, what can we do about it?
Yeah. And it really made me think. It linked back to the episode we did recently with Jason Hickel, completely different topic, looking at colonialism and extreme wealth, but similar themes about the fact that all extreme wealth has links to exploitation, and in that instant, extraction and exploitation from empire, from the global south, and this sense in which you can't really be super rich and be ethical. The two things are kind of in contradiction. But anyway, it'd be interesting to see what people think.
Yeah, let us know what you think. You can connect with us on social media, Equals Hope on X or Twitter, and subscribe to our newsletter at equals.inc.
Yeah, no, it's a really good newsletter. And I look forward to speaking to you all next time. Thanks, everybody.